Elizabeth walked down the dirt road with a large bag slung over her shoulder, muttering to herself in frustration. Her feet sank in the uneven path, making it hard to even call this a proper road. The shoes she was wearing no longer resembled the brand new fashionable pair she had bought the day before. They were now nothing more than clumps of mud. Frustrated, she cursed under her breath again and fished a piece of paper with an address out of her pocket, unsure if she was headed the right way. Suddenly, a car pulled up in front of her. "Hey, miss, need a ride?" asked a young man from behind the wheel. Elizabeth, by now thoroughly irritated, snapped back something sarcastic about him minding his own way. But almost as soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. The car sped away, its wheels kicking up muddy water that splattered all over her already filthy legs. Making her way to a relatively dry section of the road, she sat down on a fallen log and burst into tears. "Why am I so unlucky to end up in the middle of nowhere?" she thought, asking herself these questions as her tears smeared her mascara. She was so absorbed in her misery that she didn't notice the same car pulling up next to her again. This time, the driver got out and approached the weeping Elizabeth. "Sorry about that. I didn't mean to splash you," he said apologetically. "I just got upset when you snapped at me. I was only trying to help." "Save your excuses, you lunatic!" Elizabeth shouted angrily. "I really want to make it up to you. Can you at least tell me where you're headed?" The stranger offered gently. Realizing there was no sense in arguing and acknowledging she had no other practical way to get to her destination, Elizabeth extended the piece of paper with the address. After studying it carefully, the man broke into a smile. "Well, that works perfectly. Hop in. I'll give you a ride," he said cheerfully. "But I'm all muddy. I'll ruin your car," Elizabeth said, wiping her tears. But the stranger had already placed her bag in the car trunk and opened the passenger door for her. Once inside the car, Elizabeth realized just how cold she was. She was dressed inappropriately for the weather. Not that she had anticipated enduring a situation like this in the wilderness. It had been ages since she last visited a rural area, back in her early childhood when she traveled with her parents to visit her grandmother. She had long grown accustomed to the comforts of city life and forgotten what challenges might await in such remote places. Throughout the drive, the young man remained silent, though Elizabeth noticed him glancing at her in the rearview mirror. When they arrived, he helped carry her bag to the doorstep. "Well, here you are. By the way, I'm Sam. If you ever need help, just let me know. I live just next door," he said, smiling warmly and offering a handshake. "Thanks, but I think I'll manage on my own," Elizabeth replied tersely and hurried inside. Barely had she closed the door when there was a knock. Opening it slightly, she found Sam standing there once again. "Sorry, I just wanted to let you know, my mom's fired up the sauna. You're welcome to come clean up," he said, his tone kindly teasing. "Thanks, but you've already helped enough, and I need to rest now," Elizabeth said, shutting the door right in his face. Turning on the light, she took in her temporary living quarters and let out a deep sigh. The house consisted of a tiny kitchen and an even smaller room. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, evidence that it hadn't been cleaned in a long time. "Okay, I'll clean up tomorrow. Tonight, let's just wash up and get some sleep," she thought, stifling a yawn. Elizabeth explored the house but found nothing resembling a proper bathroom. The closest thing looked like a makeshift shower surrounded by curtains on all four sides. She fiddled with the taps, but no water came out. At that moment, her phone rang. "How's it going?" came the familiar voice of her fiancé, Will. "Oh, it's awful. The roads are terrible. I barely made it, and now there's no water in the house. I don't know what to do," she sighed, hoping for some advice. But Will simply offered some sympathetic words before wishing her a good night and hanging up. As she spread out the bedding she had brought with her, Elizabeth realized there was no way she could get into bed in her current state. She absolutely needed to wash off the filth. After thinking it over, she packed some towels and soap into a bag and nervously made her way to the neighboring house. The door was opened by a pleasant woman in her 40s. "Hello, I'm your temporary neighbor. I don't have any water at my place. And Sam mentioned I might be able to..." Elizabeth trailed off shyly. This was a situation she was unfamiliar with and found uncomfortable. "Of course. Come right in," the woman said with a smile. "So, you're our new guest?" she said approvingly. "That's great. The sauna's over that way." She pointed in the direction and added, "And after your bath, you're welcome to join us for dinner." At the mention of food, Elizabeth's stomach rumbled, and she suddenly realized she hadn't eaten in ages. The sauna turned out to be modern and well-maintained, making the experience pleasantly relaxing. Feeling refreshed and warm, she stepped into the house wearing a plush robe to find a meal waiting for her on the table. Declining the woman's hospitality was out of the question, and besides, she was famished. She wouldn't be heading to the store until tomorrow. The woman introduced herself as Anna. She was a wonderful conversationalist and left a very positive impression. Thanking her hostess, Elizabeth headed back to her quarters, where she bumped into Sam at the door. He glanced her over from head to toe, smiled enigmatically, and wished her a good night. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up early and got to work cleaning the kitchen. Although the water was still cold, she was grateful to have it at all. In the middle of her cleaning, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, she found Sam holding a toolbox. "Came to fix that faucet. Can I come in?" he asked. "You really didn't need to go out of your way," Elizabeth replied hesitantly, but Sam had already taken off his shoes and headed to the source of the problem. Deciding not to interrupt him, Elizabeth resumed her cleaning. An hour later, water finally flowed from the faucet, and she couldn't contain her joy. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Just because," Sam replied simply, leaving her to ponder the meaning of his words. When she later went to the store for supplies, Elizabeth couldn't help but reflect on how capable Sam was. At such a young age, he seemed to know how to handle anything, from fixing faucets to helping around the house. This sharply contrasted with Will, who had probably never held a hammer or screwdriver in his life. As Elizabeth started settling into her job, she quickly became a favorite among the local villagers. Elderly residents praised her, and appreciative patients gifted her fresh milk, homemade cheese, and eggs. Her dining table was always stocked with wholesome, fresh food. In return, Elizabeth never refused anyone a blood pressure check or a kind word. Almost every evening, Sam would drop by for tea, and they would chat about the day's events. Over time, Elizabeth found herself increasingly drawn to him. He had a great sense of humor, golden hands, and an undeniable charm. But she feared her growing feelings. After all, she had Will waiting for her in the city. Yet each evening, their conversations seemed to grow longer and more personal. One day, Sam appeared at her door, looking unusually somber. "What's wrong? You don't seem like yourself today," Elizabeth asked. "I've been thinking. You still have a couple of months here, right?" "Yes," Elizabeth nodded. "Why? And then you'll go back to the city?" Sam stepped closer, sending a shiver down her spine. "Of course. After this internship, I'll start looking for a full-time job," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't know what to do," he murmured, his eyes locking with hers. Overwhelmed by emotion, Elizabeth felt tears welling up, but quickly brushed them aside. Before leaving, Sam promised to check in on her the next day. Elizabeth barely got any sleep that night. Thoughts of Sam filled her mind. By morning, despite her lack of rest, she dragged herself to work. The first patient of the day was a young woman who walked in and immediately locked the door behind her. "What are you doing? I never lock my door during consultations," Elizabeth exclaimed. "You save that talk for old grannies," the woman snapped. "Now listen carefully, city girl. Sam is my boyfriend. Mine. Do you understand? Before you came here from your fancy city, everything was perfect. We were planning to get married, but now because of you, he's avoiding me. It's not going to happen. I'm pregnant with his child. You'll leave soon enough, and he'll forget all about you. I'll be the one raising his kid, so stay out of my way," she hissed, clenching her fists in anger. "You're pregnant?" Elizabeth asked, stunned. "Don't worry, there's nothing between us. I didn't even know you existed. He won't come near me again, I promise." Only after the young woman stormed out did Elizabeth allow herself to cry. That evening, as usual, there was a knock at her door. With a deep sigh, Elizabeth opened it to find Sam standing there. "Sam, you shouldn't come here anymore. It's for the best," she said coldly. "Why? What happened?" "Nothing. Just don't, okay? We have no future together," she replied, trying to close the door, but Sam stopped her. "You're just scared of ending up with a farmer, aren't you?" he asked angrily. "Think whatever you want. I've said everything I needed to say," she retorted, finally shutting the door. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she leaned against the wood. Sam didn't visit her again. Whenever Elizabeth encountered him in the village, she avoided eye contact, though she could always feel his burning gaze. A few days later, Will came to see her, but even his arrival brought her no joy. Deep down, Elizabeth knew their relationship was nearing its end. Still, she tried to distract herself, using her time with Will to push Sam from her mind. On Saturday, Will suggested they have a picnic in a nearby forest. Elizabeth reluctantly agreed. While waiting for him outside, she felt someone grab her arm. It was Sam. "Why are you even with him? You don't love him," he said, his voice hoarse with sleeplessness. Only now did she notice how much thinner he looked and how tired his eyes were. "I do love him. And anyway, it's none of your business," she snapped, trying to free herself just as Will appeared. "What's going on?" Will asked suspiciously. Elizabeth introduced Sam as her neighbor, and taking Will's arm, they headed toward the woods. "I don't like this whole forest idea," Elizabeth said. "Can't we have the picnic in the yard? There's plenty of space." "Are you kidding? Look at this scenery. It's like something out of a fairy tale. When will we get another chance like this?" Will said enthusiastically. "Besides, there's no need to worry. You're with me. What's there to be afraid of?" Choosing a clearing, they set up their picnic spot and split up to gather firewood. While searching, Elizabeth suddenly realized her feet had started sinking. Frantically, she tried to pull herself free, but her other foot was quickly caught too. She was sinking into a bog. Panic seized her as she cried out for help. When Will finally arrived, she begged him to save her, but he froze in fear, unwilling to come any closer. "I'll go get help," he shouted before running off, leaving her alone. For the first time, Elizabeth truly believed she wouldn't make it out alive. She screamed until her voice was hoarse, but no help came. Just as she was giving up hope, she felt strong hands grab her and heard a familiar voice. "Don't worry, I'm here, and I won't let anything happen to you. Trust me. Just keep trying to push yourself up," Sam said, his voice steady yet soothing. Elizabeth stopped struggling and let him lead. After several exhausting attempts, he finally managed to pull her free, and they collapsed onto dry ground together. "How did you even know we were here?" Elizabeth gasped, catching her breath. "I saw you two heading into the forest and followed," he explained. "Why would you risk your life to save me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I was terrified something would happen to you. I could never forgive myself if I lost you," he said quietly, pulling her closer. "But what about your girlfriend? She's pregnant with your child," Elizabeth questioned hesitantly. "What girlfriend? What baby?" "I don't know where you heard that," he replied, confused. "Some blonde woman came to see me, said you were getting married and that she was expecting," Elizabeth admitted. Sam let out a laugh. "That must have been Emily. She's been chasing me since we were kids. I had no idea she'd stoop that low." "So, there's no truth to it?" Elizabeth asked hesitantly. "Of course not. The only person I care about is you. I love you, Elizabeth," Sam said, his voice filled with emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes as she finally admitted, "I love you too." When Elizabeth returned home, Will's belongings were gone. It was as if he knew their story had come to an end. Later, after finishing her internship, Elizabeth decided to stay in the village for good. It was where she had found a home, a purpose, and the love of her life.